morning, good afternoon, good evening. In 1975, Ian Smith made the following prediction that if blacks are to rule themselves, people in towns will be walking on sewage until they believe it is normal. He also predicted that most of the infrastructure that the country had inherited from the whites would collapse. At the time, many blacks dismissed the prediction as just another remark from a white supremacist. But within 10 years, Zimbabwe's economy started to falter. Now, 44 years after independence, the evidence is everywhere. People are walking on sewage. The roads have got potholes. The infrastructure is all but gone. So what was it that enabled Ian Smith to predict with such uncanny accuracy that Zimbabwe would be a failed state? How did it all begin? For us, as for how it began, I'll refer you to Simba Makoni, who revealed in a recent interview with Trevor Nuve.
I recall very clearly that when we came into office in 1980, we inherited Ian Smith's systems. And Ian Smith's ministers drove Peugeot 504s. They drove themselves from home to work in their Land Rovers and all in kinds. Most of them were farmers. They parked their Land Rover and then they used the government vehicle when they were at work with a chauffeur. When they finished at night, they packed them and they took theirs to go home. Within the month of our coming into office, Prime Minister Mugabe then directed that every minister be issued with an E-class Mercedes-Benz. And the Peugeot 504s were retired to permanent secretaries, and the deputy ministers then took over. We can also look at many other things, small they may appear at the time. Let me hazard that even at that point, Enos Nkala was our Minister of Finance. I don't think we knew what budget we inherited from Ian Smith when the decision was taken to buy those E-class fleets for the ministers. So the material affection for material things has always been with us. And the differentiation also, even going back into the camps, Shefu, my comrades Makada were not the same. So much so that even today, when the so-called Minister for Presidential Affairs or Provincial Governor, as they were, goes to Bubi or Binga, they will be served separately and differently from the other people. The avarice grew as we began to exploit the opportunities of office. When I was in the government, the minister was allocated one vehicle that they kept, which was the sedan they used in town. if you needed to go off-road, then your ministry hired off-road vehicles from the CMED, and you were charged for it. Now a minister will have an average of 4 vehicles in his forecourt, all at government's expense.
So the leadership modeled the wrong kind of behavior, and that kind of behavior permeated all across our society. Our CEOs, like you're saying, heads of parastatals and so forth, modeled from the top.
Indeed. Indeed. I made a passing reference that we have CEOs who will buy themselves a luxury car when they can't pay wages at the end of the week or end of the month. This has been so entrenched in our psyche, this showing off, as if you are a different person. You're breathing different air from those who don't drive Prados and Land Cruisers, from those who don't drive Jeep Cherokees. We have lost our humanity. There's lots of reference to Ubuntu, very farcical, superficial, not coming from the heart. We have changed. We have changed because of our appetite for power. And we have changed because of our avarice for material things. I think when we begin to associate a position of authority and responsibility with material well-being and acquisitions, that's when the rot set in. A Toyota Cressida isn't worth.
While Dr. Makoni is trying to explain, I think Ian Smith saw that weakness even long before the country attained its independence. It was already there. There are 3 types of men out there. The first type is what I would call the primitive men, whose main driving force is, as the name implies, the primitive instinct. Eat or be eaten, dominate or be dominated. And he is so inward looking, he thinks of only himself, me, myself, and I, and only the here and now. That's the primitive man. On the other end of the scale is the more modern man, the princely man, as I'll call it. He has realized the sheer futility of this dominate or be dominated mentality. You spend all your life trying to dominate other people or fighting them off, stop them dominating you. And at the end of the day, it will always end up the same way. Whatever perch you're sitting on, somebody will get you off it. And when you start falling, God only knows how far you'll go. That is the tragedy of this mentality. And unfortunately, it is a mentality that some people have not been able to overcome. The princely mentality is one that realizes the sheer futility of that. and has gone one step further to reject it, that this is not the life I want. He accepts that I don't have to dominate other people, just as much I don't want to be dominated. And thus he embraces the rule of law. And at the heart of the rule of law is acceptance of the fundamental principle of doing unto others as you want them to do unto you. I don't want to dominate. Neither do I want to be dominated. So I don't go out there seeking to dominate other people. And I totally reject those who are seeking to dominate me. Embracing the rule of law. In between them, of course, is the average man, who will display qualities of the primitive man in one instance. In the next instance, he may show some of the princely principles and mix the two up. And each individual, family, society, nation, etc., where it's going would depend on which group has dominance, is the final say. Is it the primitive, those with the primitive mentality, or those with the princely mentality? I've got a picture there of Robert Mugabe's cabinet, 1980 cabinet. I think very few nations could have boasted as many well-educated men and women as Mugabe did when we attained our independence. So how is it then that they fell foul? Where was their princely values, the rule of law? Why is it that they were so easily bribed by Robert Mugabe and corrupted to the point where Mugabe's cabinet is renowned for being utterly useless? Never seen such a bunch of yes men. And yet they were. Indeed, Margaret Dongo was one of the few MPs who was so frustrated by the cabinet, MPs, and others, NOPF leadership, the way they kept groveling to Mugabe, that she at one point called them Wakadzi wa Mugabe, Mugabe's concubines, because they always do what Mugabe wanted them to do. They never challenged it. This cabinet we are looking at, for instance, is the cabinet that said nothing throughout the infamous Gukura Wonti of 1983 to 1987. As Dr. Simpamakone explained, none of them wanted to risk losing their E-Class Mercedes-Benz with generous salary, etc., etc. And so, even when they could see what was going on was not right, they said nothing. So to go back to where we started, Ian Smith was right after all in predicting that blacks, if they ruled themselves, would be wallowing in sewage. I think one of the problems we have with people, with some of our black leaders and followers alike, is the failure to accept that they failed. As much as many blacks, including myself, had dismissed Ian Smith's remark in 1975 as racism, still nonetheless, a more rational person would not deny that reality now. And yet, there are millions out there who still froth and fume each time somebody quoted that Ian Smith prediction. They want to believe that it's not true, even when their eyes tell them it is true. That is the kind of intellectual deficiency that has led to us becoming a failed state. As we can see from this cabinet here, no amount of education, some of them had degrees, university degrees, and highly qualified. Robert Mugabi himself boasted of no fewer than 7 university degrees. But no amount of education could drive that primitive instinct in him to dominate, to bribe and corrupt everybody so that he could exert his control over them. That is the tragedy. I think some of it goes to the extent of refusing to learn from the past. Those who stubbornly refuse that Zimbabwe has not failed are refusing to learn from the past. The few who do acknowledge failure will quickly add an explanation. All it is that's an excuse for why Zimbabwe has failed. The usual scapegoat is to blame it on the colonialists' sanctions. Of course, it's all nonsense. But that is at the heart of why Zimbabwe is a failed state. We have got to accept that there are among us leaders who have got the primitive man mentality. And when they get into power, they become big-headed. They think they are now invincible. And we, the ordinary Zimbabweans, have not helped by treating them as if they are gods. I've been talking the last few months about the issue of all leaders must be held to democratic account. That should be established and ingrained in every Zimbabwean's mind. And yet it is not. Some people still believe that their particular leader, if you are the opposition from the opposition side, Nelson Chamisa should not be held to account. And the ruling party supporters think that Emerson Mnangagwa should never be held to account. That is the primitive mentality, where you are not open-minded and look at the individual, as a mere mortal. None of our leaders have the monopoly of knowledge, and they are fallible like every other mortal, and therefore they should be held to account. Should be democratically accountable to the people. It is an essential requirement of a healthy and functioning democracy. The fact that we are still discussing it speaks volumes of our failure to govern ourselves. It speaks volumes of what Ian Smith had predicted. I do not believe, as a Black person, we are inherently incapable of governing ourselves. Because I think every human being has got the ability to learn from his or her own experience and from history. All we need is to open up our minds and learn from the past. Right now, the number one lesson Zimbabweans must learn is that we cannot keep on participating in flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy and perpetuate the dictatorship. Nelson Chamisa lied to his followers last year that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes to con them to participate in a flawed election. We must stop this happening again in 2028. That is our number one task. Have we learned anything from 2028? That is the question. That can only be answered by us stopping repeating the same mistake of 2023. We are capable of governing ourselves. We are capable of building a prosperous nation. But we've got to move the dial from the primitive mentality to the more princely mentality, where we embrace the rule of law. Think about it. Thank you very much, and have a good day.